Zara Washington stares in disbelief at the smirking flight attendant who just forced her from her premium seat for a white businessman. Despite showing her boarding pass, the crew humiliates her in front of all passengers. When she calls her father, the airline's largest investor, the flight is unexpectedly grounded. The entire crew is immediately terminated on the tarmac. But what should have been justice becomes the beginning of a nightmare as powerful forces mobilize against her family. Was standing up against discrimination worth the price she would soon pay? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more eye-opening true stories that expose the reality many face every day. Zara Washington had always known that excellence was her only option. As the 34-year-old tech executive strode through the airport terminal, she mentally rehearsed the presentation that could make her the youngest black female CEO in Silicon Valley history. Her Stanford MBA and decade of groundbreaking work had prepared her for this moment, but she could still hear her father's voice reminding her of their reality. "You have to be twice as good to get half as far," Marcus Washington would say, even as his own empire grew to billionaire status. Despite their wealth, he never let her forget the world they navigated. The investor meeting in San Francisco represented everything Zara had worked toward. Her innovative AI ethics platform had outperformed every market projection, and the board was finally considering her for the top position. She checked her designer watch, calculating the tight window between landing and her presentation. There could be no delays today. That's precisely why she'd chosen this particular airline with its immaculate on-time record and very public commitment to diversity and inclusion. The company had even won awards for its progressive policies, which gave Zara a sense of security as she handed over her premium boarding pass to the gate agent. She noticed the slight hesitation in the agent's smile, but dismissed it. After years in predominantly white corporate spaces, Zara had developed a sixth sense for discriminatory behavior, but had also learned when to conserve her energy for battles that mattered. Today's focus needed to remain on the presentation that would cap her meteoric rise from product manager to potential CEO in just 8 years. As a child, Zara had watched her father build Washington Technologies from a small software consultancy into a major player in enterprise solutions. Marcus Washington had started with nothing, the son of a janitor and a seamstress, but his brilliant mind and relentless work ethic had carried him past countless barriers. He'd taught Zara that their privilege came with responsibility, and she'd taken that lesson to heart, creating technology that addressed algorithmic bias while delivering exceptional returns. Boarding the aircraft, Zara felt the familiar weight of eyes tracking her movements. Some passengers did double takes as she walked toward the premium cabin, their expressions betraying surprise at her destination. The flight attendant at the entrance maintained a professional smile, but Zara caught the momentary flicker of evaluation in her eyes. Would today be another day of those small, exhausting challenges to her belonging? Or would she finally experience the seamless treatment her white colleagues took for granted? Zara squared her shoulders and stepped aboard, unaware that this flight would change the trajectory of her carefully planned life in ways she could never have anticipated. Zara settled into seat 1A, arranging her designer laptop and notes for one final review before landing. The premium cabin's hushed atmosphere was briefly interrupted when flight attendant Veronica Whitmore approached, her practiced smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Can I see your boarding pass again, ma'am?" she asked, emphasizing the last word with barely concealed skepticism. Despite having already shown it at 2 checkpoints, Zara wordlessly produced the document. Veronica examined it with exaggerated thoroughness before returning it with a curt, "Thank you," that sounded more like a challenge than gratitude. Just as the doors were about to close, Richard Kensington rushed aboard. The middle-aged white executive was breathing heavily, his expensive suit slightly rumpled from his dash to make the flight. He stopped abruptly at Zara's row, consulting his boarding pass with theatrical confusion. "I believe you're in my seat," he announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. When Zara calmly showed him her ticket-matching seat 1A, his expression hardened. "There must be some mistake. This is always my seat on this route." The transformation in Veronica's demeanor was immediate and telling. The cool professionalism she'd shown Zara melted into warm solicitousness as she leaned toward Kensington. "Let me check on this for you, sir," she offered, completely ignoring the documentation Zara had already provided. What followed was a masterclass in discriminatory service disguised as protocol. Despite Zara's boarding pass clearly showing seat 1A, Veronica repeatedly questioned her, checked and rechecked the system, and eventually called for Supervisor Conrad Bailey. Around them, the cabin had grown uncomfortably quiet. Some passengers studiously avoided looking at the unfolding scene, while others watched with unconcealed interest. One elderly white woman whispered audibly to her companion, "Those people always want to make everything about race." The comment stung Zara, who had said nothing about race at all. She had simply claimed the seat she had rightfully purchased. Bailey's arrival only escalated the situation. The middle-aged supervisor, with thinning hair and an air of unearned authority, barely acknowledged Zara before conferring with Kensington and Veronica in hushed tones. Their occasional glances in her direction made it clear she was the subject of their discussion. When Bailey finally addressed her, his condescending tone made Zara's skin crawl. "Ms. Washington, it seems there's been a scheduling priority adjustment. Mr. Kensington is a Diamond Elite member, and company policy gives seating preference to our highest-tier travelers." "That's not true," Zara replied evenly, years of corporate training helping her maintain composure. "I purchased this specific seat, and your airline's terms of service don't allow for displacement based on loyalty status. I'm also an elite member myself." Bailey's expression tightened at her knowledgeable response. Without further discussion, he turned away and picked up the cabin phone. Moments later, the intercom crackled to life with a public announcement that sent heat rushing to Zara's face. "Would the passenger currently seated in 1A please gather your belongings and move to seat 16E? Our gate agent made an assignment error that needs correction. Thank you for your cooperation." They hadn't even had the decency to address her by name, despite having her information right in front of them. The humiliation of being singled out without being named made the discrimination even more pointed. Everyone knew exactly who was being asked to move. Have you ever witnessed discrimination happening right in front of you? Comment number 1 if you think Zara should stand her ground, or number 2 if you believe she should avoid confrontation to keep the peace. Don't forget to hit that like button if you've ever had to fight for respect in spaces where you belong. What would you do if you were publicly humiliated like Zara? Would you quietly accept the injustice or find a way to fight back? Let me know in the comments below, and subscribe to find out what happens next in this shocking true story of privilege, power, and the price of standing up for yourself. The walk of shame to seat 16E was the longest of Zara's life. Each step down the aisle felt like a public announcement of her second-class status, despite her first-class ticket. The economy cabin was already packed, with overhead bins overflowing and passengers jostling for armrest territory. Her assigned middle seat was sandwiched between a man whose body spilled into her space and a woman who made a show of sighing dramatically when Zara indicated she needed to sit. "They letting just anybody buy first-class tickets these days," muttered a voice from the row behind her. Another responded with a snicker, probably using her welfare check. Zara kept her eyes forward, her face a careful mask of indifference that concealed the storm of emotions beneath. The casual racism wasn't new, but its sting never lessened with repetition. As the safety demonstration began, Zara watched Richard Kensington make himself comfortable in her seat, accepting champagne from a fawning Veronica, with the entitled ease of someone who had never questioned his right to occupy any space he desired. The injustice of it all reached a breaking point within her. Zara had spent her entire career carefully calculating when to speak up and when to strategically let things go. She had built her success on picking her battles wisely. But this was different. This was blatant. This was public. And this compromised her carefully planned schedule for a career-defining presentation. With trembling fingers that belied her outward calm, she reached for her phone just before the announcement to disable electronic devices. Zara rarely leveraged her father's position for personal advantage. It was a point of pride that she had built her own reputation in the tech world. Today, however, was an exception that demanded extraordinary measures. "Dad," she whispered when he answered. aware of eavesdropping ears around her. "I need your help." The normally composed executive briefed her father on the situation in clipped, precise sentences, keeping her voice low despite her rising anger. Marcus Washington's response was initially measured. "Are you sure this is discrimination, Zara? Could there be some misunderstanding about the seating arrangement?" His question wasn't dismissive. It was the careful consideration of a black man who had navigated white corporate America for decades, who knew the costs of crying wolf and the equally damaging cost of remaining silent in the face of real prejudice. "I'm sure, Dad," Zara confirmed, detailing the staff's behavior, the selective enforcement of non-existent policies, and the public humiliation tactic. "My boarding pass clearly shows seat 1A. They invented reasons to move me for this white man." The change in Marcus's tone was immediate and chilling. "I understand. This stops now." As one of the airline's largest investors, Marcus Washington rarely interfered with day-to-day operations. His quiet fury now manifested not in raised voice but in deadly calm. "Put your seatbelt on, Zara. I'll handle this." What happened next unfolded with a speed that left passengers and crew alike in shocked disbelief. Just as the aircraft began taxiing toward the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom announcing a return to the gate due to an operational decision from airline management. The collective groan from passengers turned to confused murmurs when the aircraft parked, and the doors reopened to admit 3 airline officials in corporate uniforms and 2 security officers. Conrad Bailey's face drained of color when the most senior official asked him and his crew to gather their personal belongings and follow them off the aircraft immediately. Veronica's practiced smile crumpled as the reality of the situation dawned on her. The entire cabin watched in stunned silence as the flight crew was escorted off the plane, their protestations cut short by the corporate representative's clipped statement. "This is a direct order from executive management. Your employment has been terminated, effective immediately." As they disappeared down the jetway, one of the remaining officials approached Zara in economy. "Ms. Washington, we sincerely apologize for the inexcusable treatment you've received. Please return to your originally assigned seat in first class." The walk back up the aisle was even more conspicuous than her earlier relegation, but this time the passenger murmurs carried a different tone as smartphones captured the unprecedented scene. Within 20 minutes, a new flight crew had boarded, offering profuse apologies to all passengers for the delay. The new lead flight attendant personally escorted Zara back to seat 1A, where Richard Kensington was now being asked to return to his actual assigned seat several rows back. His face flushed with anger and embarrassment as he gathered his belongings under the watchful eyes of passengers who now understood exactly what had transpired. As the plane finally took off, Zara sat in her rightful seat, a complex mixture of vindication and unease washing over her. Justice had been swift and decisive, but as her phone filled with notifications of the incident already spreading across social media, she couldn't shake the feeling that this victory would come with consequences she couldn't yet foresee. Inside the corporate world she inhabited, power moves of this magnitude never went unanswered. She had won the battle, but she sensed a war was just beginning. Zara's presentation to the investors went flawlessly. Her AI ethics platform demonstration received enthusiastic approval, and the preliminary handshake suggested her path to becoming CEO was clearer than ever. It was only when she finally stepped out of the meeting and checked her phone that she realized how drastically her world had shifted in those few hours. 57 missed calls, hundreds of text messages, thousands of notifications across her social media accounts, and one particularly disturbing voicemail from her company's PR director. "Zara, call me immediately. There's a situation developing online." A passenger had recorded the entire incident on the plane, but the version going viral had been carefully edited to show only the crew being escorted off and Zara returning to first class. Without the preceding discrimination, the narrative was being twisted into something unrecognizable. Entitled billionaire's daughter gets entire crew fired for not giving her special treatment. The hashtag Boycott Washington Tech was trending nationally. Comment sections overflowed with vitriol. Another rich black woman playing the race card to get what she wants. These people get a little money and think they own the world. Her, daddy bought her way through Stanford, and now buys her airline seats too. Zara's hands trembled as she scrolled through the barrage of hatred. Most disturbing were the comments specifically mentioning her race, suggesting she had weaponized her blackness to punish innocent white workers. The irony was breathtaking. She had said nothing about race during the entire incident. The discrimination had been visible to anyone paying attention, but the online mob had already decided she was the villain. As her Uber crawled through San Francisco traffic toward her hotel, Zara received a call from her father. "Are you somewhere safe?" Marcus asked without preamble. The unusual question sent a chill through her. "I'm in an Uber. Why?" "Your home address has been published online," he said grimly, "along with your phone number and email. Former airline employees are encouraging people to let you know what they think of you." The first threatening email arrived as if on cue. "You got my sister fired after 15 years of perfect service. Hope you're watching your back, princess." It was followed by dozens more, each more graphic than the last, many containing racial slurs and explicit threats of violence. By evening, news vans were parked outside both her San Francisco hotel and her Seattle condominium. Several major networks were running the story with chyrons like privilege gone wild and corporate nepotism cost jobs. Only a few outlets bothered to reach out for her side of the story, and those that did seemed determined to frame her actions in the worst possible light. "Ms. Washington, would you say you have a history of using your father's influence to get special treatment?" One reporter asked during a brief phone interview that Zara had agreed to on her PR team's advice. "I've never once asked my father to intervene in my professional life," she answered truthfully. "This was an extraordinary situation involving blatant discrimination." "But you admit you called your father to have the crew fired," the reporter interrupted, clearly uninterested in the discrimination aspect. The airline's official statement only fueled the flames. "We are investigating an incident involving customer service and appropriate seating assignments. While we regret any inconvenience to passengers, we take allegations of improper conduct seriously." The carefully worded response neither confirmed nor denied the discrimination, leaving the public to fill in the blanks with their own biases. Zara's company quickly distanced themselves from the controversy. The CEO who had been mentoring her sent a terse text. "Board emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Be prepared to address this situation." Her colleagues, who had been congratulating her on the successful presentation hours earlier, now sent awkward messages of support that felt more like preemptive farewells. By midnight, Zara sat alone in her hotel room with the curtains drawn, watching her carefully built reputation crumble in real time. A particularly vicious online thread had posted pictures of her from college, scrutinizing her appearance and relationships for any evidence of playing the race card before. Someone had even created a mocking countdown website. Days since Zara Washington last complained about racism, her phone buzzed with a security alert from her home system. The camera showed a group of people gathered outside her condo building, some holding homemade signs. "Jobs, ego, and fire Zara next." The doorman was trying to disperse them, but the crowd was growing. As she finally fell into restless sleep, after arranging for additional security, Zara couldn't help but wonder if standing up against one instance of discrimination had just cost her everything she'd worked for. The swift justice on the airplane now seemed like a Pyrrhic victory at best, and at worst, the beginning of a nightmare that would follow her for years to come. She had always known that fighting racism came with consequences, but she never imagined they would be so immediate and overwhelming. And the worst part? This was just the beginning. The boardroom at TechVision Innovations had always been Zara's sanctuary, a place where data and performance spoke louder than prejudice. Today, however, the long mahogany table felt like an execution block as 12 board members stared at her, with expressions ranging from discomfort to open hostility. CEO James Harrington, once her mentor and champion, couldn't quite meet her eyes as he called the emergency meeting to order. "We need to address the situation from yesterday's flight," he began, his usual commanding voice reduced to an uncomfortable mumble. "The public response has been overwhelming and predominantly negative." "You mean the response to me being discriminated against?" Zara asked pointedly. The CFO, Patricia Winters, cleared her throat. "Zara, we're not here to debate what happened on that flight. We're here to discuss the impact on our company. She slid a tablet across the table displaying real-time stock metrics. We've lost 8% since markets opened. 3 major clients have called expressing concerns about continuing their contracts. Because I stood up against racism? Zara's voice remained calm even as her heart raced. Because, interjected board member Richard Thornton, the public perception is that you abused your family connections to fire working-class employees over a seating dispute. Whether that's accurate or not is beside the point. Perception is reality in the market. Zara looked around the table, searching for a single ally. These were people who had praised her leadership, her innovation, her vision just yesterday. Now they sat in judgment, weighing her value against their stock options. The betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't entirely surprising. She'd seen this pattern before with other black executives who became problems when they refused to accept mistreatment. The board feels, Harrington continued, examining his manicured fingernails, that it might be best if you take a leave of absence while this blows over, just a few weeks, to let things settle. And my promotion to CEO, Zara asked, already knowing the answer. Indefinitely shelved, Thornton stated flatly. We can't appear to be rewarding behavior that the public perceives as entitled and vindictive. The injustice was staggering. After years of exemplary performance, after the presentation that had by all accounts exceeded expectations, after bringing in more new business than any other executive in company history, she was being punished for refusing to accept discrimination. And most galling of all was their refusal to even acknowledge the racial component of what had happened. "Would you be having this conversation if I were white?" she asked quietly. The uncomfortable shifting in seats was answer enough. Harrington, attempted damage control. "This isn't about race, Zara. It's about optics. Even your father's company is suffering. Washington Technology's stock is down 12%. As if summoned by the mention, Zara's phone lit up with a message from her father. "Airline CEO just called. They're publicly apologizing to you while their legal team is preparing to investigate abuse of investor influence. Damage control on their end, but be prepared for more fallout." Zara placed her phone face down and addressed the board. "I understand optics perfectly well. They're the reason I was moved from my seat despite having a valid ticket. They're the reason you're turning on me instead of supporting an executive who faced discrimination. And they're the reason you're all too comfortable punishing me for standing up for myself." She stood, smoothing her designer suit with deliberate calm. "I won't be taking a leave of absence. You'll have my resignation instead. And when TechVision's diversity metrics come under scrutiny, which they will, I hope you all remember this moment when you chose comfort over courage." As Zara gathered her belongings, her soon-to-be former mentor made one last attempt. "Don't throw away your career over this, Zara. In a few months we can revisit the CEO position." "I'm not throwing away anything," she replied. "I'm refusing to work for people who don't have the backbone to stand against discrimination. Consider what message you're sending to every minority employee at this company by your actions today." Walking out of TechVision's glass headquarters, Zara felt a complex mixture of liberation and fear. She had just walked away from a decade-long career trajectory, but staying would have meant compromising her dignity in ways she couldn't accept. Her phone buzzed with an alert. The airline had just released their promised public apology, a carefully worded statement expressing regret for Ms. Washington's negative experience, while announcing a comprehensive investigation into all aspects of the incident. The comments beneath the airline's social media post were already filling with skepticism from both sides. Those who thought the apology was insincere corporate speak, and those who believed Zara deserved no apology at all. The court of publics. Opinion had already rendered its verdict, and evidence and facts seemed entirely beside the point. Has something like this ever happened to you, where standing up for yourself cost you professionally? Comment number 1 if you would have resigned like Zara did, or number 2 if you think she should have accepted the leave of absence. Hit that like button if you believe corporations need to do better at supporting employees facing discrimination. When your career and principles collide, which one would you choose? And what price are you willing to pay for dignity? The cost for Zara is about to get much higher as this story continues. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to find Out what happens next in this shocking true story. The lawsuit landed with the dull thud of legal paperwork, but the impact of a bomb. 18 former airline employees, led by flight attendant Veronica Whitmore and supervisor Conrad Bailey, filed a wrongful termination suit against both the airline and the Washington family personally. Their complaint, drafted by high-powered attorney James Prescott, alleged capricious termination without cause driven by the undue influence of a privileged investor's daughter. Zara sat in her father's downtown office reviewing the filing. With their legal team, the 47-page document was a masterwork of misdirection, positioning the crew as innocent victims of corporate overreach while carefully avoiding any mention of their discriminatory behavior. Most troubling was the demand for $7 million in damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. "They're claiming I got them fired for no reason other than entitlement," Zara said incredulously. There were dozens of witnesses to what actually happened. Marcus Washington's expression was grim as he explained the reality. What witnesses remember and what they're willing to testify to are very different things. The airline is getting cold feet about standing with us. Their legal department is worried about a class action discrimination suit if they admit fault, but equally concerned about labor lawsuits if they defend the terminations too vigorously. The Washington family attorney, Eleanor Chen, was even more direct. "The airline's CEO called me this morning. They want to settle quietly and move on. That means throwing you under the bus, Zara." The media circus surrounding the case exceeded even Zara's worst expectations. Court TV announced a special series titled "Privilege and Punishment: The Airline Incident," while major news networks ran segments debating whether the Washington family had overreacted. Few outlets mentioned discrimination at all, and those that did treated it as an unsubstantiated claim rather than the core issue. Discovery proceedings revealed a disturbing pattern that gave Zara momentary hope. The airline had settled 7 discrimination lawsuits in the past 3 years alone, all with strict non-disclosure agreements. Former employees confirmed in depositions that premium cabin passenger profile management was an unofficial practice where preferred seating was preserved for passengers who match the airline's luxury brand image, a thinly veiled code for white and wealthy. Just as momentum seemed to be shifting in Zara's favor, their star witness, a former flight attendant named Maya Johnson who had worked with Bailey and Whitmore, contacted Zara's legal team in obvious distress. "I can't testify tomorrow," she sobbed over the phone. "They found out about my brother's parole violation. They said they'd make sure he goes back to prison if I speak against them." "Who threatened you, Maya?" Eleanor Chen asked sharply. "I don't know exactly, but the message came right after I talked to someone from airline management about what I've seen Bailey do to other black passengers." The pattern became clear. The airline executives were playing both sides. Publicly, they were performing corporate contrition while privately undermining Zara's case at every turn. Evidence mysteriously disappeared from the airline's servers. Witnesses suddenly became unavailable or changed their stories. Even the unedited security footage from the flight, which would have shown the entire incident clearly, was now corrupted according to airline IT. Most disturbingly, Zara discovered a connection between Richard Kensington, the white passenger who had taken her seat, and the airline's regional director. They had attended the same exclusive golf club for years, and phone records obtained through Discovery showed multiple calls between them the day before the flight. What had initially seemed like an isolated incident of discrimination was beginning to look like something more deliberate and coordinated. "They're burying us in paperwork while destroying evidence," Eleanor Chen explained during a strategy session. "And they're winning the public relations battle too. Every day this drags on, more people accept their version of events." Zara scrolled through her phone, showing her father the latest online trends. An investigative journalist who had initially expressed interest in covering the systemic discrimination at the airline had abruptly dropped the story without explanation. Meanwhile, a prominent conservative pundit was hosting one of the fired flight attendants on his show that very evening, billing it as the truth behind the Washington airline scandal. "We need to change tactics," Marcus decided. "They want to make this about privilege and entitlement because that distracts from the discrimination. We need to refocus on the pattern of racist treatment at this airline." But as they would soon, discover the forces aligned against them were more powerful and far-reaching than they had imagined. This wasn't just about one incident on one flight anymore. Something larger was at stake, and the Washingtons had inadvertently stepped into a corporate war zone where truth was the first casualty. The brick came through the dining room window during Sunday dinner, scattering glass across the table where the Washington family had gathered. Marcus reacted instantly, pulling his wife Catherine to the floor while Zara shielded her younger brother Tyler. The projectile, wrapped in paper with a crude message, "Race baiters go home," landed amidst the remains of their meal. "Everyone to the safe room," Marcus ordered calmly, though his eyes betrayed his fury. The Washington estate, once a sanctuary of success and achievement, had become a target since the airline incident went viral. This was the third act of vandalism this week alone, escalating from graffiti to broken windows to this direct assault during family time. Outside, voices chanted hateful slogans. The security team was already responding, but the damage to the family's sense of safety was done. In the reinforced inner room of the house, Catherine checked everyone for injuries, while Marcus called the police again, knowing from experience that their response would be delayed and half-hearted. "This has to stop," Catherine said, her hands trembling despite her effort to remain composed. Once a prominent neurosurgeon before retiring to focus on their charitable foundation, she had weathered racism throughout her career but never expected this level of targeted hatred in their own home. "They found Tyler's school," Zara said quietly, showing her phone screen to her parents. Their youngest son's private university had been plastered with flyers showing Marcus and Zara's faces with the caption, "Affirmative Action Family Destroys Working Class Lives." Tyler, a sophomore engineering student who had earned a perfect SAT score and multiple academic awards, was now being portrayed as an undeserving beneficiary of his family's influence. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. His dean called yesterday. Some students are petitioning to have Tyler removed from the robotics program, claiming his presence is divisive now. "What?" Zara's shock quickly transformed to anger. "He's the most talented engineer in that program." "Talent doesn't matter when people decide you're a symbol rather than a person," Marcus said wearily. The weight of recent weeks showed in the new lines on his face. Washington Technologies had lost major contracts as the controversy continued. Their family foundation's annual gala had been canceled after multiple donors withdrew, citing scheduling conflicts that fooled no one. The financial impact was significant but bearable. What hurt most was watching decades of community work and reputation building crumble over an incident where they had been the victims, not the villains. Marcus had built his empire while maintaining a strict ethical code and generous philanthropic initiatives. Now, strangers online were dissecting his business practices, inventing corruption narratives, and even questioning whether he had truly earned his success. "Maybe I should sell my airline shares," Marcus suggested, not for the first time. "If I divest completely, perhaps they'll leave us alone." "No," Zara said firmly. "That's exactly what they want. For us to back down, to accept punishment for standing against discrimination. If you sell now, it validates their narrative that we did something wrong." Tyler, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "My roommate asked if he could move to a different dorm yesterday. Said he was getting too much heat for living with me." His voice cracked slightly. "We've been friends since orientation." Catherine wrapped her arm around her son's shoulders. "This isn't about you, honey, or about anything we actually did. It's about making an example of a successful, Black family that refused to know their place." The harsh reality of her words hung in the silence that followed. For all their success, education, and wealth, they were experiencing what countless less privileged Black Americans faced daily: the swift and disproportionate punishment for asserting their basic dignity. Zara's phone rang with a news alert. The airline employee's attorney had just held a press conference announcing an expanded lawsuit now targeting Washington Technologies directly, claiming Marcus had violated corporate governance by using his investor influence for personal vendettas. The stock was already plummeting in after-hours trading. "Enough," Zara said, standing abruptly. "We've been playing defense since this started. It's time to fight back strategically." "How?" Tyler asked. They control the narrative. No one wants to hear our side. Then we'll make them listen, Zara replied, the tech executive in her taking over. Dad, your company has data security contracts with half the Fortune 500. Tyler's an engineering genius. I built an AI ethics platform. And Mom has connections throughout the medical community. We have resources they can't imagine, and it's time we use them. Marcus studied his daughter, recognizing the determined look that mirrored his own at her age. What are you suggesting? They want a war, Zara said, her voice steady and clear above the continued chants outside their home. Let's give them one they don't expect. Discrimination isn't an incident. It's a pattern, Zara stated, standing before the hastily assembled war room in the Washington family's corporate headquarters. 3 weeks had passed since the dining room attack, and she had used every minute strategizing their counter-offensive. The whiteboard behind her detailed a multi-pronged approach that leveraged the family's considerable resources and connections. Around the table sat a carefully selected team: Eleanor Chen, their legal counsel; Dr. Raymond Johnson, head of the EC; National Civil Rights Alliance, Amara Okafor, a data scientist who specialized in algorithmic bias; and investigative journalist Derek Santos, who had broken stories on corporate malfeasance for major publications. This unlikely coalition represented Zara's first strategic move, building alliances with individuals and organizations that could amplify their message beyond the Washington family. The airline wants to make this about one flight and one rich family, Zara continued. We're going to prove it's about systematic discrimination affecting thousands of passengers. Her first victory had come from an unexpected source. After Tyler was harassed on campus, his engineering professor, Dr. Liu, had reached out with surprising information. His own statistical analysis of airline seating data showed patterns consistent with racial discrimination. As an expert witness, with no connection to the Washingtons, his testimony would be difficult to dismiss. The Civil Rights Alliance has identified 27 former passengers willing to testify about similar experiences on this airline, Dr. Johnson reported. Most never filed formal complaints because they didn't believe they would be taken seriously. With our legal support, they're now preparing affidavits. Eleanor Chen added, We've filed motions compelling the airline to preserve all seating. Assignment data for the past 5 years. Their attorneys are fighting tooth and nail to prevent this discovery, which only confirms they have something to hide. Zara nodded, turning to Amara. What have you found in the employee communication channels? The data scientist's expression was grim as she pulled up a series of internal messages obtained through a whistleblower. There's a coded language system used by certain gate agents and flight attendants. Cabin atmosphere management is their euphemism for ensuring premium cabins remain predominantly white. There are specific notations for passengers of color who should be redirected from first class regardless of their tickets. The evidence was damning, but Zara knew evidence alone wouldn't change the narrative that had already taken root in the public consciousness. For that, they needed strategic media management. Derek, she turned to the journalist, your investigation publishes next week? He nodded. Sunday edition, front page. We've corroborated the pattern with multiple sources and data points. The airline can't dismiss this as an isolated incident anymore. The comprehensive strategy extended beyond legal and media fronts. Catherine Washington had activated her network of medical professionals to document the psychological impact of discrimination on passengers. Marcus had commissioned an independent audit of the airline's hiring and promotion practices, revealing troubling disparities. Even Tyler contributed by developing an algorithm that identified inconsistencies in the airline's public statements versus their internal communications. As the meeting progressed to tactical details, Zara's phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. Not everyone at the airline supports what happened to you. Check your secure email. Urgent. Excusing herself briefly, she found an encrypted message containing internal airline documents that confirmed her suspicions. Richard Kensington wasn't just a random passenger. He was a close friend of the airline's chief operating officer, Gregory Phillips, and his chance encounter with Zara had been deliberately orchestrated. The attached email thread showed Phillips instructing cabin crew to ensure our VIP passenger Kensington receives his preferred seating arrangement regardless of current assignments. More damning was his response when asked about the existing booking. The Washington reservation can be adjusted. She'll make a scene, they always do. Document everything so we can control the narrative afterward. Zara's hands shook with a mixture of vindication and renewed anger. This hadn't been casual discrimination, it had been a planned provocation. But why target her specifically? What could the airline possibly gain from such a risky maneuver? The answer came 3 days later through another whistleblower contact. Phillips and several airline executives had substantial stock options that would vest only if they maintained certain performance metrics. Marcus Washington's growing criticism of their sustainability practices as a major investor had put those bonuses at risk. Creating a scenario that would publicly discredit the Washington family had been their solution. They never expected Dad to get the crew fired, Zara realized during an emergency strategy session. They wanted me to make a scene about discrimination that they could twist into an entitled rich girl tantrum. When Dad escalated beyond their expectations, they pivoted to Plan B, the wrongful termination lawsuit. This revelation transformed their legal strategy overnight. What had been a defensive posture against discrimination claims became an aggressive pursuit of corporate conspiracy charges. Eleanor Chen filed amended countersuit documents alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violations of civil rights laws, with damages now seeking hundreds of millions. Have you ever discovered that what seemed like a random incident was actually a calculated attack against you? Comment number 1. If you believe corporations should face severe penalties for orchestrating discrimination. Or number 2. If you think this happens more often than we realize. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're inspired by how the Washingtons are fighting back with strategy instead of just emotion. What would you do if you discovered powerful people conspiring against you? Would you settle quietly or fight publicly? The Washington family's battle is about to uncover even deeper corruption than they imagined. Subscribe now to find out what shocking evidence emerges next and how far these airline executives will go to protect their scheme. The unmarked envelope arrived at Zara's temporary office containing a single USB drive and an anonymous note. Meeting room 4B, Altitude Airlines headquarters, March 12th, 6:30 p.m. Everything you need is here. Caution dictated she have the drive professionally examined before viewing its contents. The security expert's report came back within hours. Clean. Contains audio files and documents. Source appears legitimate based on metadata. When Zara finally listened to the files, the blood drained from her face. The recording captured a closed-door strategy meeting at Altitude Airlines 2 weeks before her fateful flight. The voices were unmistakable. Gregory Phillips, the airline's COO, Richard Kensington, and several board members. Washington Technologies is becoming a problem, Phillips stated clearly. Marcus is pushing too hard on environmental compliance and threatening to leverage his investor position to force policy changes. The implementation costs would destroy our quarterly numbers and our bonuses. So what's the plan? Asked a voice identified in the transcript as board member Jenkins. His daughter Zara flies our routes regularly, Phillips replied. Richard has agreed to help us create a situation that will discredit both her and, by extension, her father's moral authority. Kensington's smooth voice cut in. She'll be on the Chicago to San Francisco flight next week. I'll arrive late. Claim her seat, and when she inevitably protests, the crew will create a scene portraying her as an entitled troublemaker. We'll make sure passengers record it. And if she doesn't react as expected? A woman's voice asked. She will, Phillips said confidently. I've reviewed her social media. She's outspoken about discrimination. We'll trigger that response, then twist it to our advantage. By the time she lands, she'll be trending as another rich black celebrity crying racism over nothing. What about Marcus? Jenkins asked. He'll be discredited by association. The environmental proposals will lose support, and we'll have bought ourselves at least 2 more quarters before having to implement those costly changes. The recording continued detailing their strategy, including media contacts primed to run, with their narrative and online influencers paid to amplify certain hashtags. What they hadn't anticipated was Marcus Washington's drastic response in having the crew fired immediately. The recording revealed their pivot to Plan B, the wrongful termination lawsuit that would further damage the Washington reputation, while positioning the airline as caught between an unreasonable investor and their loyal employees. Zara immediately sent the files to Eleanor Chen, who confirmed what they had suspected but couldn't prove. The entire incident had been orchestrated as part of a hostile business strategy aimed ultimately at Washington Technologies. This wasn't just discrimination. It was corporate sabotage using racism as a weapon. Further investigation revealed Kensington wasn't merely a friend of airline executives. He was a partner at Pinnacle Ventures, a private equity firm that had been attempting to acquire controlling interest in Washington Technologies for years. Marcus had repeatedly rebuffed their offers, considering their business practices predatory. The discrimination incident was just one piece of a larger hostile takeover strategy. Most shocking was the discovery that former flight attendant Veronica Whitmore now worked directly for Kensington, hired just days after her termination, with a compensation package far exceeding her airline salary. The supposed victim had been a willing accomplice all along. The whistleblower's identity became clear when the USB drive was tracked to Samantha Reyes, an executive assistant who had worked for Phillips for 3 years. When Zara's legal team contacted her, she agreed to testify that she had been uncomfortable with the plan from the beginning but feared for her job if she spoke up. "They talked about you like you were just collateral damage," she told Zara during their first meeting. "When I saw what they were doing to your whole family afterward, I couldn't stay silent anymore." With Samantha's testimony and the damning recordings, the conspiracy was exposed in all its calculated malice. What had appeared to be an isolated incident of discrimination on a flight was revealed as the tip of an iceberg of corporate corruption, market manipulation, and deliberate exploitation of racial tensions for financial gain. As Eleanor Chen prepared to present this evidence in court, Zara felt a cold clarity replace the emotional turmoil of recent months. This had never really been about a first-class seat. It had been about power, money, and the lengths to which some would go to protect both, even if it meant weaponizing racism and destroying innocent lives in the process. The federal courthouse steps were crowded with protesters from both sides as Zara ascended toward the entrance. Security had been doubled after threats against both the Washington family and Judge Miranda Rodriguez, who had refused to recuse herself despite defense attorneys' claims that her background as a civil rights attorney created bias. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, Zara took her seat at the plaintiff's table beside Eleanor Chen. What had begun as a wrongful termination suit against the Washingtons had transformed into a countersuit alleging corporate conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations after the damning evidence emerged. The airline executives, now defendants themselves, sat stone-faced across the aisle with their legal team. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Miranda Rodriguez," the bailiff announced. The first witness called was Zara herself. As she took the stand and was sworn in, she felt the weight of every eye in the packed courtroom. The airline's attorney, James Prescott, approached with practiced confidence. "Ms. Washington, you come from extraordinary privilege, do you not?" he began. "Objection, relevance," Eleanor called. "I'm establishing the witness's background, Your Honor," Prescott explained smoothly. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Counselor," Judge Rodriguez warned. Zara answered calmly. "I was raised with financial security, yes. My parents ensured I understood that privilege came with responsibility." What followed was a methodical attempt to paint Zara as entitled and disconnected from the experiences of ordinary people. Prescott highlighted her education at elite institutions, her executive position, her designer wardrobe, systematically constructing an image of someone to whom the jury couldn't possibly relate. "So when you didn't get exactly what you wanted on that flight, your first instinct was to call Daddy to punish the working-class employees who didn't treat you like royalty. Isn't that correct?" "No," Zara replied evenly. "My first instinct was to accept my assigned seat and avoid confrontation, as most Black Americans are conditioned to do. I only called my father when it became clear I was being discriminated against, specifically because of my race." "Discrimination," Prescott repeated skeptically. "Ms. Washington, haven't you claimed discrimination before when faced with professional setbacks?" Eleanor objected immediately, but Prescott had achieved his goal, planting the suggestion that Zara habitually played the race card. The questioning continued this way for hours, a relentless effort to undermine her credibility and character, while avoiding the actual evidence of conspiracy. The most difficult moment came when Prescott displayed private text messages between Zara and a college friend discussing an encounter with campus security years earlier. "Didn't you claim racial profiling when you were simply asked for ID, just as every student was?" "Those messages were obtained illegally," Zara responded, maintaining her composure despite the invasion of privacy. "And they're being presented without context. Campus security had stopped me 3 times that week while white students walked past unchallenged. By the time cross-examination ended, Zara was emotionally exhausted but unbroken. The strategy to paint her as oversensitive and entitled had partially landed with some jurors whose expressions reflected skepticism. What Prescott hadn't counted on was Zara's quiet dignity throughout the ordeal, which had also made an impression. The defense's surprise hostile witness the following day was Jeremy Matthews, a board member from Zara's former company. Ms. Washington had a pattern of attributing normal business challenges to discrimination, he testified. Her departure from our company was presented as principled resignation, but in reality, performance concerns had already been documented. The betrayal stung, particularly as Matthews had been among those congratulating Zara on her exceptional presentation just before the flight incident. Eleanor's cross-examination revealed he had recently accepted a position with a subsidiary of Pinnacle Ventures, Kensington's firm, but the damage was done. Outside the courthouse, media coverage intensified. Protesters clashed, some supporting the Washington family with signs reading, "Stand against corporate racism," while others condemned them with messages like, "Stop playing the race card." The case had become a lightning rod for broader tensions about race, privilege, and accountability in America. The turning point came on day 7 of the trial. Eleanor Chen called Samantha Reyes to the stand, followed by technical experts who verified the authenticity of the recorded conspiracy. As damning as that evidence was, it was Zara's redirect testimony that shifted the emotional tide of the courtroom. "Ms. Washington," Eleanor asked, "could you explain how these experiences of discrimination have affected you throughout your life?" Zara took a deep breath, looking directly at the jury. "I've spent my entire career being told I need to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. I've smiled through microaggressions, accepted lesser treatment, and swallowed justified anger because showing emotion would confirm stereotypes about angry black women. I've watched my brilliant father question whether doors closed on him because of his business decisions or his skin color. I've comforted my younger brother when classmates suggested he only got into university because of affirmative action, despite his perfect SAT scores." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes glistened. "The most insidious part of discrimination is how it makes you doubt yourself. Was that person rude because they're having a bad day, or because of my race? Did I miss that opportunity because someone else was better qualified, or because I don't fit the company image? That constant questioning erodes something in your spirit over time." "And on that flight?" Eleanor prompted. "On that flight, there was no ambiguity. It was blatant, public, and humiliating. And still, some people in this courtroom would rather believe I invented it all than accept that racism didn't end with segregation laws." As the trial entered its final phase, Eleanor introduced the most damaging evidence yet. Internal airline communications explicitly discussing strategies for passenger demographic management and references to keeping premium cabins on brand by limiting access to certain customer profiles. One email from Phillips to cabin crew supervisors explicitly stated, "Use discretion with upgrades and seating reassignments. Our high-value customers expect a certain cabin environment, particularly in first class." The coded language was clear to everyone in the courtroom. The battle extended far beyond the courtroom as the Washingtons fought on multiple fronts. Altitude Airlines stock had plummeted following the revelations, but the corporate war had only intensified. While Zara focused on the legal proceedings, Marcus Washington faced an unexpected crisis, a coordinated hostile takeover attempt of Washington Technologies. "They're using the distraction of the trial," Marcus explained during an emergency family meeting. "Pinnacle Ventures has been quietly acquiring shares while our price is depressed. They've nearly reached the threshold needed for board control. The strategy was as brilliant as it was ruthless. While the Washingtons fought for their reputation in court, Kensington and his allies had leveraged the controversy to undermine Washington Technology's market position. Investors nervous about the public relations nightmare had sold shares at declining prices, allowing Pinnacle to scoop them up through various shell companies to conceal their activities. If they succeed, Marcus continued, they'll dismantle everything we've built. Our environmental initiatives, our diversity programs, our ethical AI development, all sacrificed for short-term profits. Zara immediately recognized the broader picture. This was never just about airline environmental regulations. The discrimination incident was phase one of a larger strategy to destabilize Washington Technologies for acquisition. Catherine, who had remained the family's emotional anchor throughout the ordeal, posed the question they all faced. Do we fight on all fronts, or consolidate our resources? The decision was unanimous. They would fight everywhere simultaneously, using the IZE, Washington family's greatest strengths, intelligence, innovation, and principles. Marcus mobilized loyal investors to secure additional shares, while Catherine activated her network of philanthropic leaders to publicly reaffirm support for Washington Technology's mission. Tyler, the engineering prodigy, uncovered the technical vulnerability that became their counter-offensive. Analyzing trading patterns, he identified the algorithm Pinnacle used for their share acquisitions and developed a competing system that could predict and preempt their moves. They're using AI to time their purchases, he explained. We can use better AI to outmaneuver them. The corporate battlefield shifted daily. Washington Technologies announced a strategic partnership with 3 international tech firms, diluting share percentages and making the takeover more expensive. Pinnacle countered by attempting to freeze Washington family assets through derivative lawsuits. Both sides deployed media campaigns, regulatory challenges, and shareholder outreach in a chess match of corporate strategy. The unexpected threat emerged from within. During a critical strategy meeting, Zara noticed inconsistencies in how information was flowing. Sensitive decisions made in private were being countered by Pinnacle almost immediately. We have a leak, she realized, initiating a careful disinformation campaign to identify the source. The mole was revealed to be Jonathan Pierce, Marcus's longtime friend and executive vice president, who had been quietly promised the CEO position in the new regime. The betrayal cut deep. Pierce had been a groomsman at Marcus and Catherine's wedding and had bounced baby Zara on his knee 34 years earlier. When confronted with evidence of his duplicity, Pierce didn't deny it. You've lost touch with business realities, Marcus, he justified. All this focus on social responsibility and environmental impact is dragging down shareholder value. Pinnacle understands that profit is the only metric that matters. And the racism orchestrated against my daughter? Marcus asked quietly. Was that just acceptable collateral damage too? Pierce had the decency to look uncomfortable. That wasn't my idea. But yes, in business, sometimes hard decisions are necessary. His admission was recorded and immediately shared with the board, resulting in Pierce's termination and providing additional evidence for the ongoing trial. More importantly, it allowed the Washingtons to feed controlled information to Pinnacle, leading them into a spectacular strategic blunder. Believing they had inside information about Washington Technology's defensive strategy, Pinnacle committed billions to a massive share purchase timed to cross the control threshold. What they didn't know was that Marcus had secured a previously undisclosed investment from international partners that diluted share value at the exact moment of Pinnacle's move, costing them hundreds of millions while failing to achieve their objective. The boardroom battle culminated in a special emergency session called to vote on leadership during the crisis. Kensington himself attended, confident that his faction had secured enough proxy votes to challenge Marcus's position. The atmosphere was tense as shareholders filled the executive conference room at Washington headquarters. For 30 years, Marcus began his address. We've built this company on innovation balanced with responsibility. Today, some suggest we should abandon those principles for expediency. Kensington's faction presented their alternative vision: aggressive cost-cutting, reduced investment in sustainable technologies, and streamlined operations that would eliminate the diversity initiatives Zara had championed. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. What Kensington hadn't anticipated was Zara's strategic masterstroke. While the takeover attempt had been underway, she had been quietly documenting how Pinnacle's other acquisitions had fared. The pension, funds raided, the employees terminated, the environmental violations that followed their cost-cutting. This dossier was distributed to all shareholders just before the vote. "This isn't about ideology," Zara addressed the room. "It's about sustainable business. Pinnacle's model extracts short-term value at the cost of long-term viability. Their companies typically collapse within 5 years of acquisition, while Washington Technologies has delivered consistent growth for 3 decades. The vote wasn't close. Shareholders overwhelmingly rejected Pinnacle's vision, instead approving a restructuring that strengthened the Washington family's leadership position. As Kensington stormed out, Zara called after him, "You should have just taken your assigned seat, Richard." 1 year later, Zara Washington stood at the podium in Washington Technologies' main auditorium, addressing the company as its new CEO. The journey from that fateful flight to this moment had transformed both her and the business landscape around her. "Today we announce the Washington Initiative for Corporate Accountability," she began, surveying the packed room of employees, media representatives, and industry leaders. "This $10 billion program will provide legal and financial support to individuals facing discrimination while creating industry standards for genuine inclusion." The audience applauded, many aware of the personal cost behind this professional triumph. The lawsuit against Altitude Airlines had concluded with a historic settlement: $300 million in damages to the Washington family and affected employees, plus mandated structural changes to airline policies and practices. The conspiracy had been exposed in full, resulting in criminal charges against Phillips, Kensington, and several board members for securities fraud and civil rights violations. The settlement funds had been entirely dedicated to establishing the nonprofit foundation Zara now introduced, focusing on corporate accountability and systemic change rather than personal enrichment. The foundation would provide resources for others to fight discriminatory practices while advising companies on meaningful diversity beyond performative gestures. Justice had come at tremendous cost. The Washington family had endured death threats requiring ongoing security measures. Marcus had aged visibly during the ordeal, the stress of fighting on multiple fronts taking a physical toll that concerned Catherine deeply. Tyler had transferred universities after continued harassment, though he had found a more supportive academic environment at his new institution. For Zara personally, the victory remained bittersweet. Former colleagues still avoided her at industry events, uncomfortable with the spotlight she had placed on corporate racism. Dating had become complicated by public scrutiny and security concerns. The psychological impact of having her character assassinated across national media lingered in unexpected moments of doubt and anxiety. Yet there had been unexpected positive consequences too. Thousands of letters had arrived from people inspired by her refusal to accept discrimination, many sharing their own stories of standing up despite the costs. A group of Black female executives had formed a coalition with Zara as their informal mentor, supporting each other through similar challenges. In corporate America, Washington Technologies' ethical stance had attracted top talent committed to both innovation and responsibility, strengthening their market position beyond pre-crisis levels. As Zara concluded her announcement, she spotted a familiar face in the audience. Samantha Reyes, the whistleblower whose courage had exposed the conspiracy, now directed ethics compliance at a major corporation. Their eyes met in mutual recognition of how individual choices could cascade into systemic change. The foundation launch complete, Zara prepared for her flight to the opening of their new headquarters in Atlanta. The airline industry had implemented significant changes following the case, with carriers competing to demonstrate genuine commitment to equitable treatment. Still, Zara felt the familiar tension as she entered the terminal, the memories of that day never far from mind. Boarding the plane, she noticed the immediate recognition in the flight attendant's eyes, followed by conspicuously careful courtesy. Passengers whispered as she made her way to her seat, some supportive, others still resentful of the troublemaker who had exposed uncomfortable truths. The hyper-awareness of being watched had become Zara's constant companion in public spaces. Midway through the flight, Zara observed a scene unfolding several rows ahead. A young Middle Eastern woman was being questioned about her seating assignment by an attendant, while a white male passenger claimed there was a mistake. The situation was disturbingly familiar, though less blatant than what Zara had experienced. Without hesitation, Zara unfastened her seatbelt and approached. "Excuse me," she addressed both the attendant and passengers calmly. "I couldn't help noticing this seating confusion. Perhaps I can help clarify airline policy on assigned seating." The recognition was immediate. The flight attendant paled slightly, immediately verifying the woman's boarding pass and confirming her right to the disputed seat. The male passenger, suddenly recognizing Zara, quickly mumbled that he must have misread his own assignment and moved to his correct place. Returning to her seat, Zara caught the woman's grateful glance. No words were exchanged, but none were needed. The silent acknowledgement between them spoke volumes about shared experiences and the ongoing necessity of vigilance. The incident attracted little attention from other passengers, a minor moment in an ordinary flight rather than a national controversy. As the plane began its descent, Zara reflected on the complex legacy of her stand against discrimination. The system hadn't been completely transformed. Change never happened that neatly or completely. But meaningful shifts had occurred. Accountability, mechanisms had been established, and spaces had been created for more voices to be heard and respected. The price had been high, higher than anyone should have to pay for basic dignity. Yet as the aircraft touched down, Zara felt certain of her answer to the question that had haunted her throughout the ordeal. Yes, standing up had been worth it, not just for herself, but for every person who would board a plane, enter a boardroom, or claim their rightful space with a little more confidence because someone had refused to move when told they didn't belong. This powerful story of Zara Washington's fight against discrimination reveals several profound truths about racism in America today. First, it demonstrates how privilege and resources cannot fully shield Black Americans from racism. They may simply face more sophisticated forms of discrimination. Even with wealth, education, and corporate success, Zara encountered the same prejudice that affects millions of others without her advantages. Second, the story exposes how standing up against racism often triggers backlash far worse than the initial incident. When victims of discrimination refuse to accept mistreatment, they frequently face character assassination, professional consequences, and threats to their safety. This punitive response serves to silence others who might speak out. Third, we see how discrimination is rarely just about personal bias, but often intertwines with power, money, and institutional interests. The weaponization of racism as a corporate strategy reveals how deeply entrenched these problems remain in American institutions. Fourth, the narrative highlights the exhausting reality of double consciousness that many Black Americans experience, constantly questioning whether negative interactions stem from racism or ordinary conflict, while simultaneously managing their responses to avoid confirming stereotypes. Finally, the story teaches us that fighting discrimination requires strategic thinking, documentation, allies, and persistence. Change doesn't happen through single confrontations, but through sustained pressure across multiple fronts. The price of standing against injustice is high, but the cost of silence is ultimately higher, both for individuals and society. True justice doesn't mean winning a lawsuit or receiving compensation. It means creating systems where such discrimination becomes unthinkable rather than just unprofitable. Has a story like Zara's ever made you question how you would respond to witnessing discrimination? Comment below with a time you stood up against injustice or wish you had. Would you have had the courage to make that call like Zara did, knowing the potential consequences? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that expose the realities many face every day. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories that might otherwise go untold. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the complex reality of modern discrimination and the courage it takes to fight against it. Thank you for joining me for this journey through Zara's experience. Remember that each of us has the power to either reinforce or challenge the systems we encounter. May we all find the strength to choose justice, even when it comes at a personal cost.